Dr. Jake Porter of Daring Ventures Counseling, Coaching, and Consultation, and I'm here today with one of my team members, Jessica Guillory.
Hello.
Jessica, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, I'm one of the couples counselors here. I came on quite recently, and so I'm really excited to be sitting here having this conversation.
And we are here today to make public a conversation, a personal conversation that's been going on for some time now, several weeks, months, maybe even at this point.
Mm-hmm.
And that's on the subject of systemic racial injustice, and today specifically to talk about racial trauma. For me, this is a journey that I've been on, well, in one way all my life, I guess, but in an explicit way for the last probably 4 years. When, and it's a story for another time, but when my eyes were open to the reality of embedded systemic racism. And from that point forward, there was a slow learning curve which reached a sort of break point in a way with the murder of George Floyd, with conversation with Jessica and others in my life, and so that's what brings me here today. Jessica, you want to share?
Yeah, I appreciate you mentioning George Floyd. That particular murder really ruptured something inside of me so that I could no longer passively, or I guess peaceably, just have these emotions of anger and sadness and outrage and including intellectually just the thoughts of all the things that are wrong, no longer had the choice to just sit there. And so me being here is kind of a therapeutic process for myself of getting these ideas and these emotions out, and hopefully using that as an impetus towards change, not just in me, not just in you, but in the field and the wide world. Big goals, but
yes,
here we are.
Big goals. It's been really incredibly helpful to me, the conversations that I've had with Jessica, and so we do plan to do a series of these videos, at least 3 or 4 we have planned, but today we're just going to talk about the topic of racial trauma. We both work in a practice where trauma is one of our specialties. It's a focus here for us, and it's something that I speak on and teach on a lot. And so applying my understanding of trauma to the experience of Black Americans has really been instructive to me, and I hope it's helpful to you as well.
It is indeed, yeah. I especially like to frame it in this way because, when people talk about racism, immediately the defensiveness comes up, oh, I'm not a bad person. But really, if we break it down almost clinically, right, there are things that the body is experiencing as a result of injustices. And so perhaps, or at least I hope, fellow mental health professionals, seeing the parallels between rape trauma or something like that, in which the body literally can't cope, and being in this system can't cope. We have more compassion, more empathy, and more capacity to respond.
Right. Yeah, because it is, when you understand the science of trauma, there is a physiological, neurobiological, and psychological reality to this. And so that's what we want to talk about. When I'm teaching about trauma, the sort of basic definition that I give for what constitutes trauma is when the brain and body, the mind and body, experience either too much too fast or too little for too long. It has a traumatic effect. So something that's so overwhelming, it's bigger than what I can process in the moment. It kind of undoes my integration of systems, right? Or too little for too long. So a profound neglect that has a cumulative effect that reaches a point of being traumatic. Another way to talk about trauma is we talk about big T trauma and little t trauma. So a big T trauma would be something that is, and here's a big water cooler word for you to impress your friends at the water cooler, punctiliar in nature. It's at a point in time. You can point to it. It's specific. So a car accident, the sudden loss of a loved one, an assault, those would all be big T. A betrayal, yeah. A moment of discovery, and you suddenly realize someone has betrayed you. That would be punctiliar. Versus little T trauma, where it's that sort of death by 1,000 cuts, where there's been these little small woundings that have an accumulating effect.
In or outside of conscious awareness.
That's exactly right. Often these little T traumas are trickier to treat because I can't point to it.
Right, yeah. It's cumulative, and I will even say, so the process of those little T's can culminate in a big T, and that's kind of what happened for me of, oh dear God, like this is my reality? Like unraveling of things that I thought were true, wanted to be true, thought should be true. And so, sorry, just wanted to...
No, that's good. That's actually exactly where I wanted to go next. So if we were to apply these very basic elementary concepts about psychological trauma to the experience of Black Americans,
sure.
We've got big T traumas, which would be things like watching the recordings of Black men and women having their lives snuffed out, and not just that, but at the hands of those who are supposed to be serving and protecting and caring for them.
Yeah. So that big T is a present reality, I feel, for us as a Black community, having to continually be like rammed, right, with this painful awareness of Black bodies not mattering or Black souls being worth less than another soul. And so I would definitely count that as an ongoing, like, big T, especially with one so gruesome as the 8 minutes and 46 seconds of George Floyd being murdered. So big T's, yes. But as I was saying, like the little T's in present day, right? So microaggressions, if I'm in a workplace and there's an inappropriate joke or a palpable difference in the way a person of color is treated versus maybe a white counterpart, those things exist. And not just the lived experience of like a human being right now, but bearing the weight of our history and feeling like the reality of America not valuing a certain people group and knowing that I am a part of that people group is yet another point of difficulty to metabolize such a reality.
Yeah. So both of those are happening at the same time. There are other elements to this as well, and so we can think about trauma, especially when we've got these multiple facets. It becomes complex. It's layered, right?
Yes.
And so another layer to this is that it's been going on for generations, and we know, like, the science is out there, we know that trauma is passed down from one generation to the next through epigenetics. So in our genes, we've got these little switches, and our environmental experiences, particularly relational experiences, turn off and turn on gene expression and certain switches in the DNA, and then that can be passed down from one generation to the next. And so the original research I read on this was from the Holocaust, but there are people still alive today who lived in a world where lynchings were commonplace. It is not that many generations ago that slavery was still in place. And so there's an intergenerational effect to that, but you also bring up sometimes the sort of cultural intergenerational dynamics. Can you speak to that?
Sure.
As well?
Yeah, spur me on a little bit more.
Well, just the patterns of relating
Mm-hmm.
and thinking and doing.
Yes, yes. So for me, as a black woman, there's an unspoken rule to be careful around white men, right? Or careful around white people. And it's not so much present anymore, like if a black man flirts with a white woman, Emmett Till will happen in the same way as it did, in the past. But definitely in my upbringing and in the black community, there's certain scripts about what to do or not do culturally to survive, what part of your culture is welcome for expression versus hide that away unless you're in a black space. And so that constant body state of like hypervigilance and that constant like cognitive state of double consciousness has a different like definition, but here like of two minds, having to be yourself but also not yourself at the same time, is yet another layer to the difficulty of maneuvering as a person of color, as a black person
Right.
in America.
Right. So we've got the big T traumas happening, the little T traumas happening. There is this intergenerational dynamic that both has genetic, biophysiological ramifications and sociocultural implications as well. And then on top of that, there's what we actually know about the physiology of a trauma response in the body, right? So the way it's supposed to work, right, is that I'm in this integrated state, all systems working together, enter a threat, and there's a spike in adrenaline and cortisol, and that that spikes in my body, in my brain. I focus on that. I go into hypervigilance. And what's supposed to happen is that once that is resolved, there's a period of time for recovery where I de-escalate, my systems come back together. There's even a sort of shake it off period, and then come back up to a state of regulation and integration. Well, when there's no resolution, when I have to live in the state of hypervigilance, that has its own effects.
It does indeed. Yeah, I always think, when going through the trauma response about like back in the olden days, if there's a tiger, right? You either run from the tiger or you kill the tiger or you hide successfully from the tiger until it goes away. And so there's clear choices to help resolve the problem of the predator. And then your body can, like once the problem is resolved, return to homeostasis. But the problem with this systemic and like socio-cultural environment, like milieu of racism, is there's no solution for a person of color. Like there's no decision where, if I defend myself successfully, I'm okay now. The racism problem has been diffused, right? There's no hiding, there's no fleeing, there's no fighting in which the predator can be defeated or placated. And so, Americans have their daily struggles of work stress, financial woes, traffic, all those things that happen. But truly, this type of trauma is the air we breathe. Like it's constant. And so exactly as you're saying, that ability to de-escalate or diffuse or doesn't quite come, and perhaps can't quite come if things continue to be the way that they are.
Right, and that has a huge taxing effect physically on the body. We know that living in that state of hypervigilance, increased adrenaline, increased cortisol, those toxic stress chemicals have an effect on overall health. Higher instances heart disease and problems well, I mean, I could go on forever in all the areas.
Yeah, let me list a
Birthing,
few.
yeah.
Yeah, birthing, right, the childbirth process, but also the gestation process, right? The fetus's ability to grow in the ways that it needs to, have access to the nutrients and chemicals that it needs to. Things like eating good food, right? If a body is constantly under stress, one will tend to seek comforting foods, high fat, high sugar, and the way that the family is structured, right? Like a traumatized brain, a traumatized body, the access to social safety systems that allow for things like healthy shaming, right, that parents need access to, playfulness that parents need access to pass on to their children, that you are safe, loved, and seen. You know, these things affect the Black community on all these levels. And I'm going to go on a brief tangent, Jake, but that is why this conversation is beautiful to me, because even as I'm saying these things, what runs in the back of my mind is that the Black community is blamed for being poor, blamed for having poor family values, blamed for, you know, health problems, we eat bad, we don't take good care of ourselves, but truly no behavior, no people group are in a vacuum. And so if we can reorient our thinking, instead of it, this is your fault, you are bad, to what processes are enacting upon you, and how can we help? How can you heal, right?
Yeah, the reality is that every single human is formed. There's a formative effect to being in any system or culture or society. I am formed by these systems just as you are, but not in the same way, but we're both formed by these systems is what I'm saying. And the choices that I make, the inclination to make those choices, are in part a result of the formation that I've experienced within the system.
And even the luxury of not having to make certain choices, right?
Yeah.
So that is also a part of forming the brain into what automatic decisions happen. If I, as a person of color, only have this set of decisions because of a system that disenfranchises me, and you as a white male have these decisions available to you because of a system that benefits you, you know, the individualistic posture no longer works. Like, it no longer follows that I, because of my character or whatever it is, am in the situation that I'm in, and you because of your individual character.
Right. And so what ends up happening, and this is another dimension of trauma, another layer of complexity to the experience, is that there's a gaslighting with that blame, right? So a distortion of reality, turning it around so that people end up pointing at the effects of the trauma and naming them as the cause.
Yes, exactly.
Right. Yeah.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just thinking, and sorry, I dipped out for a second because I thought of my niece, and this might be too personal for the video, but whatever.
It's up to you.
It can happen. So her father is not as involved as a father would otherwise be, and so my journey in that situation has been so consistently to say, there is nothing wrong with you, baby girl. Like, you are so fully worthy of being stayed with, you are so worthy of being loved, like, you are perfect exactly as you are, even when you're annoying, even when you don't listen to your mama, like, even when you be ragging on your auntie, like, you are value itself. And so for me to say, oh, you did something wrong, that's why this person did this to you, how cruel would that be? Yet we do that as a society towards a people group, right, who really from our transportation here had abuses and injustices inflicted upon us, and yet somehow now, right, the blame lays at our feet for the abuse.
Right.
So that kind of micro level really helps me communicate the level of wounding and the level of pain it is to say you black person are bad and that's why you languish in this country, or that's why you have the cultural, hang-ups that we see, which I would even say the cultural hang-ups that a white person claims they see don't actually exist. Like anyway.
That could be another video.
Yeah, it could be another video.
So what we're trying to say, to kind of try to sum up here, is that when we think about racial trauma, you have to think about all these different facets to the experience of people who walk the streets in this country with black skin,
Yes.
with brown skin.
Mhm.
And so from the big T to the little t, from the daily incremental stuff, the intergenerational piece, all of that together all fits with what we understand about psychological trauma and its effects. And in coming videos, where we hope to take this is we're going to talk real specifically about a parallel between racial trauma and a type of trauma that we see regularly here at Daring Ventures, that's betrayal trauma.
Yes.
And we also want to talk about the mental health field and whether you are seeking psychotherapy or counseling, or you are doing psychotherapy or counseling, how you can identify or be a part of an anti-racist mental health practice.
Yes.
Is that right?
That's right.
Yeah. So that's where we're headed, and we thank you for being with us thus far,
Thank you.
and we look forward to being with you in the future.